about the DISC behavioral assessment, you've probably heard that it's a hiring tool and it's a way to figure out what role someone is likely going to be a good fit for. And that is one use for the DISC, but it's not the only one. Did you know that you can use the DISC to understand the people in your life and communicate more effectively with them? That's right. It's a fantastic tool for figuring out what motivates people, what their greatest fears are, and how they make decisions. So today I'm going to give you a crash course on using the DISC as a tool for improving your relationships and communication with everyone in your life. Let's get into it. Hey, before we get started, hello, my name is Vanessa, and I run a recruiting firm called R.E.A Staffing. We help real estate agents and teams hire administrative and management level staff. And on this channel, we focus on fostering careers in real estate and growing real estate teams. So if you're interested in that topic, please hit the subscribe button. I'd love to see you back here on the next video. Okay, let's talk about the DISC. Now, the DISC was developed in the 1920s or 30s by a psychologist who figured out that human behavior can be categorized into four buckets. And these buckets are defined as dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. Now, nobody is 100% of one of these. We're usually two or three prominent traits, and then we have lesser traits as well. And our DISC score can change over time. This isn't static. And while we can use the DISC as a tool to help us identify what role somebody is in, it's also a way to understand how we communicate. So let's talk about that. So first of all, let's talk about what the DISC means. As I said, D stands for dominance. People with a high D score can be described as dominating and decisive, and people with a high I score can be described as innovative, talkative, and maybe even impulsive. Now, I like this graph because it divides these four categories into action versus stability and task orientation versus people orientation. So people who are a high DI are going to be very action oriented. They're all about action versus someone who is a DC. Someone like that is going to be very task oriented. So tasks are going to come as more important to them versus people. And we can keep going around the circle. An SC person is going to value stability. They're going to be more stable and less action oriented, and so on. So we'll talk more about each of these styles in just a minute, and then we'll talk about some do's and don'ts for communicating with somebody with that style. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about some of the different DISC assessments that are out there. If you've taken the DISC, there's a good chance you've taken a free version called Inner Metrics. This is the one that Tony Robbins has on his website. And this is fine as a kind of get to know yourself tool, but it isn't the best version if you are using the DISC for hiring. We use a version called People Keys, and we actually sell at a discounted rate access to this profile on the Hire Lab website, and I'll link to that. But what we like about this version is that after interviewing and DISC testing literally thousands of people, we find that this one is the most accurate, and it tends to not skew high on one letter or another. Now, things might have changed. Intermetrics might have revalidated their report, but several years ago when we did use that version, we found that most people scored as a high I, even people who definitely were not extroverted, high I individuals. So in the People Keys version of the DISC, your score is broken out into these three boxes. The way we define a score is by all the letters that are listed above the 0 line. And we look at the third box on this page. So you'll see for this example, this person is a ID. So the highest point on the graph is our first, our dominant trait. And then the second one above the line is our second dominant trait, and so on. So in this case, this person is a ID. Okay, so let's get into what these letters mean and give you some examples. So high Ds. I think Richard Branson is a great example of a high D personality. And a quote from him is, "Screw it, let's do it." And I think that kind of sums up the high D personality well. High Ds make up only 3% of the population, and their motivation is to get it done. They want things done and they want it done now. If you have a person, a friend, a colleague, a partner in your life who has a very high sense of urgency, who is always on time or early, they might be a high D. Ds are characterized by being dominant, direct, and decisive, and they want authority. They like variety in their activities. They seek out prestige and freedom, and they have a very bottom line approach. High Ds are great in a crisis because they're going to make a decision. The problem is, if there is no crisis, they might just be the one who's wandering around the office looking for a problem to solve. So, if your boss is like this is when you want to give them something important and useful to do before they start meddling in what you're supposed to be doing. Okay, their weaknesses are that they can overstep authority. They like to be in charge. They can be argumentative sometimes. They can be very direct in a way that can be off putting to some people if they're not careful. And they can try to do too much at once. You know, they're very type A, if you will. Now, their biggest fear is being taken advantage of. These are the ones who kind of are pessimists and expect that somebody's going to be screwing them over on something. They can get very defensive if they feel like they're not getting the upper hand in a deal. And so these are things to keep in mind when communicating with a high D, right? So their motivation is to get things done now. Their greatest fear is being taken advantage of. So, how do we communicate with a high D? First of all, you want to match their directness. They don't want the story, they don't want the emotional backstory, the drama. They just be direct, focus on facts, keep it positive. So, Ds tend to be big picture thinkers. They can be very optimistic. And so you want to keep it positive and not kind of dig into the unfun parts of the conversation. And you need to get to the point. So again, don't talk about feelings. I think, I feel, I really wish this thing could maybe happen. Just get to the point with a high D. Okay, let's talk about high I's. I think Oprah is a wonderful example of a high I. Here's a quote from Oprah. I was once afraid of people saying, "Who does she think she is?" Now I have the courage to stand and say, "This is who I am." That's a great example of a high I thought process, personality. So high I's make up 11% of the population, and their motivation is recognition and approval. These are the people who want to be center stage. They are extroverts. They get energy from people versus low I's who are introverts and they can get worn out if they have to be around people or have to talk to people too much all day, every day. So high I's they seek social esteem and acceptance. They want freedom from detail and being controlled. They are free birds. They like to talk to people. They need positive working conditions and they need recognition for their abilities. Now, their value to the team is that they are creative problem solvers. They're great encouragers. They're, the cheerleader in the office, and they can be a peacemaker as well. Now, in terms of possible weaknesses, they might be more concerned about being liked than getting tangible results. They can be inattentive to details, and they may not be the best listeners. They want to talk. Their biggest fear is fear of rejection, which makes sense, right? If their biggest motivation is recognition and social approval, then it makes sense that their greatest fear is rejection. So, how do we talk to a high I so that they will receive the information that we need to share with them? First of all, you need to build rapport and be friendly. Unlike a high D who just wants you to get to the point, a high I wants to hear about your weekend. They want you to ask about the kids. They want to feel like they're in relationship with you before you talk about anything heavy. You need to give them plenty of opportunities to talk through their ideas. These are very verbal people who need to talk out loud to solve problems. So give them time to do that and ask questions. Again, give them a chance to talk things through. And again, make sure to allow time for social conversations. Now, again, like I said earlier, high I's don't love the details. So if you can avoid getting into the nitty gritty, please do, because you will lose their attention. Um, Try very hard to not allow them to feel rejected. So if you need to provide criticism or feedback, do it in the most gentle way possible and, sandwich it between two positive anecdotes, that type of thing. And because they're not great with details, make sure to follow up your conversation with a written action list or a calendar reminder so that whatever you guys agreed on actually gets done. Okay, let's talk about S's. Now, S's are the nicest people. S's are like Mr. Rogers. They want everyone to get along. And thank goodness, because 69% of the population is a high S. So they seek out security in situations. They have a sincere appreciation for other people. They are comfortable with repeated work patterns, where high D's and high I's like a lot of freedom and lack of control. S's like a system and a process. So these are the people you want in your life, in your office, that because they're going to make sure things get done the same way, the right way, every single time. We like that. They can need time to adjust to change because they like routine and steadiness. When things change, they have to adapt their thinking and their process, and it can take them a little time to do that. So if you have a high S in your life and there's a big change coming up, give them time to process. They identify it as being part of a group. So these are people who really value a strong team culture where they really feel that they belong and that they're supported. And they value having specialization in their work. So they don't want to be a generalist, they want to be really good at something. As you can imagine, people like this are a great value to the team environment at work because they're reliable and dependable. They are loyal and they're team players and they're good listeners. Now, in terms of weaknesses, we talked about their possible resistance to change. And sometimes they can hold a grudge, especially if they're criticized about something. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And their biggest fear is loss of security. So again, their greatest motivation is to get along. Their greatest fear is loss of security. I talk about this all the time with my clients who want to hire an assistant. And by the way, most assistants are high S and C on the disc, not always, but that's pretty common. And that profile seeks stability. And an agent, a sales agent, is typically a high DI. So they are comfortable with change, with ebbs and flows to their income, high risk, high reward. They're all for that. And then they hire an assistant who really values stability and security. They want to feel safe in their job. And this agent thinks that they should be compensated the way the agent is compensated, low base, big bonus. That does not work for a high S because it takes away their sense of stability and security. So, something to keep in mind. All right, so let's talk about communicating with a high S. So, first of all, again, because these are people oriented people, remember I's and S's are people oriented. Build rapport, be personable, ask about the kids, ask what you did on the weekend. You want to give them time to process and ask questions. If you're in a meeting with a high S and you come in and you say, I want your ideas about XYZ, and you put them on the spot, they're likely going to clam up. The high D, the high I in your office is going to pop off with the first thing that comes to mind. Your S's and your C's are going to need more time. They're going to want to feel secure in their answer before they say anything. And if you're a high DI and you want to move quickly and you want answers right away, this can feel off-putting. But it's important to understand that people process information differently. So, if you want opinions or feedback from your high S assistant, for example, in your office, then it might be a good idea to send them the agenda in advance and say, hey, I want to talk about this item. I value your opinion and ideas. Please come prepared to talk about this. And that way that they have time to gather their thoughts. So, S's also want specifics and clarification. Again, this goes back to wanting to feel secure in what they do. So if you give them a project and you don't give them time to ask questions to clarify, they're not going to feel comfortable moving forward. They're not going to make it up as they go along, which is a pretty typical thing that a high D would do. So again, be patient, allow them to adjust to change, and make sure to explain the how and the why behind a new task. And you'd be surprised if you do this with anybody in your life who's a high S. But if they understand the context behind what they're doing, they can bring more to the table. They can do more than what you actually asked for. But you have to slow down and take the time to communicate that. So with S's, you don't want to expect them to make decisions quickly. They're just not going to do that. Don't be confrontational. And please, whatever you do, do not reprimand them in public. Again, that takes away their sense of safety and security. And finally, let's talk about C's. I thought Bill Gates was a great example of a high C. Here's a quote from him: patience is a key element of success. Now, C's make up 17% of the population, and their motivation is to get it right? So D's want to get it done, C's want to get it right. And both of those traits are task oriented. So their motivation is to get it right. They value autonomy and independence. They like a controlled work environment. So if things are changing all the time and really crazy and there are no protocols in place, that's going to frazzle a high C. You'll tend to see a lot of high Cs in professions like accountants, forensic interviewers, computer programming, assistants, executive assistants, people like that, transaction coordinators, in any role where details matter and there's, doing things the right way is really important. High Cs shine in those roles. So, in terms of their value to the team, they are very logic based and based in reality. So, they can be your anchor to reality on a team. This happens a lot when we have a high DI agent who has lots of great ideas. And then their high CS, a C assistant, is the one who says, that sounds great. Where would you like to put that on the list of 20 priorities you told me were also really important to you, right? Anchor in reality. In terms of weaknesses, they really value doing things the right way. And sometimes this means that they can work slowly. If they're a very high C, they can be very defensive when the quality of their work is put into question. And sometimes they need to do things the right way according to their standards, even if you disagree with it. So this is a rub that can come up with a high C. But I would say it's a good problem to have. I'd much rather have somebody in my life who really cares about doing things the right way. Wouldn't you? And then finally, a high C's greatest fear is criticism, right? They want to get things right and they don't want to hear that you don't like what they did. They're pretty proud of their work. They really care about what they do. So you need to be careful how you present your constructive feedback to them. And in terms of communicating with them, focus on the facts. Support your argument with facts. Come prepared. You want to talk about the details. These are people who really do care about the specifics and the details and the numbers. And if you try to gloss over that, you'll lose your argument with them. And then allow them time to ask questions because they're going to keep digging into those details. Kind of piggybacking on that, you don't want to be vague. Again, don't criticize their work and avoid being confrontational. So I think that what we've been able to cover today is a really basic overview of the different styles and how we communicate with them. And I thought it would be fun to just sort of reinforce the verbal cues that would help you tune into whether somebody is probably a high DI or an SC or some other combination. So I prepared some Dr. Seuss quotes, and I'm going to have you guess which letter um, corresponds to this quote. So, first one, kid, you'll move mountains. Does that sound like a D, a get it done kind of person? An I, a somebody who wants to be liked? An S, somebody who's seeking stability? Or C, somebody who wants it done right? So, I would say this associates with a high D, right? A driver, kid, you'll move mountains. Get it done. And will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. So this to me sounds like a high C. If you ask a high C what time it is, they will tell you exactly what time it is. If you ask a high I what time it is, uh, they'll give you some framework around what time it might be, and a whole story about what's happening that day or the weather, right? So these are some verbal clues you can tap into to help you figure out who you're communicating with so you can adjust your approach accordingly. Step with great care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. For me, that sounds like a high S, somebody who seeks out stability and is caring about other people and wants safety. And then finally, that leaves us with why fit in when you are born to stand out? That's a high I, if there ever was one. All right, you guys, I hope you found this helpful. I have a whole training video on how to use the DISC in your hiring process, and I will link to that below. If you're curious about the DISC and you want to take it yourself, we are able to sell the DISC for only $25. I believe it's $40 if you go directly to People Keys, and that link again is below. If you liked this video, give it a like. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is your DISC profile? What is your boss's or your assistant's profile? And does this help you understand how you could communicate better with that person in your life? And yeah, subscribe. We'll see you on the next video. Cheers.